is a panel with former Nike directors to discuss the state of design tech and how to introduce the latest tools to your team for success. So, if I'm honest, I've been kind of like dreaming about this panel for a really long time. We're in about to have a really amazing and inspiring conversation. So without any further ado, I would love to welcome Chad Knight and Jonathan Beals onto the stage.
Hi, Danielle. Thank you.
Hey guys, welcome.
Hello.
Yeah, so really excited for today's conversation. In the prep conversations that we've gone too deep into certain topics, and we were trying to leave some of it for you guys to also watch because we were already covering everything in private. But first of all, it would be great to hear from you guys a little bit of, who you are. Introduce yourselves first.
Yeah, Chad, you want to take it first?
Sure, I will take a stab. Hi, my name is Chad Knight. I am currently kind of heading up a few things. I'm involved in a few projects, but my background is I got into all this through skateboarding. I was a professional skateboarder for 15, 20 years. Had to find an exit plan. Ended up working at Home Depot, but then found a computer and got some bootleg Cinema 4D software. Taught myself how to model a shoe and got into DC shoes. And from there, I learned Rhino and the tooling and all about footwear design. And I was so excited to work at DC shoes that I would take on any project that they needed. So I learned animation. I ran the 3D printer. I just was also under the impression, being self-taught, that if you knew 3D, you knew all things 3D. So I just kept learning things 3D and polygon modeling and, everything. And then eventually that led to the opportunity to go over to Vans, where I helped set up a visualization department where we were doing real-time rendering for product review. But I was looking for something, I think, a little bit more, something to sink my teeth into that was a little bit more challenging. So the opportunity popped up at Nike to help set up what was a 3D studio, essentially. And initially, it was set up to facilitate new tools. And this is where I met Jonathan, and we started working. That transitioned then, and my role became just director of 3D footwear design, where I was overseeing the 3D design team, as well as working with the business side of things to do our best to implement new tools and technologies that were relevant to what we're doing and up with the times. And I'm just continued to be very interested in this space and learning, because I continue to see the opportunity growing exponentially every year.
Love it. I'll take it next here. Thank you, Chad. My story is fairly winding as well. I did not quite come from a skateboarding background, thank God, but to each their own. I actually grew up in a really small cow town in Washington, where the cows and the chickens outnumbered the people. And I love to draw and I love to design, and I did not have any concept that that could actually pay the bills. And so, of course, the most rational decision that a high schooler could make is to then go to the University of Washington to get a degree in aerospace engineering, because that, of course, made logical sense. I love space and I love designing, and I figured, hey, that could combine both of them. I got into the degree and realized that I was completely wrong, and that was not for me. And I had a buddy that was going to the Art Institute of Portland in game design, and I was talking with him, and I was like, hold up, like, people design games? That's actually a role? And he was like, yeah, man, like, how do you think you get the games? There's designers in there. And my mind just, it was so widely blown open. And so I did a lot of research in the industry, and I love movies. And so I ended up coming down to the Art Institute of Portland to get a degree so I could work in film. And so I got out of college and joined a small commercial and visual effects firm, and just loved it. I started there as a look development artist, did some modeling, and just really fell in love with the industry. And then I met this just wonderful woman who ended up becoming my wife. And as we were going through that whole process, I realized that there are some, really challenging aspects to this industry. And a lot of it requires a very nomadic lifestyle where you need to move around a lot and very long hours. And I realized that a lot of the friends that I was looking up to had really strenuous relationships. So I started to look outside of film and games to try and understand how I can leverage these skills elsewhere. And then that's when I learned about product design. And Nike was in my backyard, and I love Nikes, and I love the footwear scene. And so I just happened to apply, and through a ton of luck and timing and a little bit of skill, I landed a job there, and it ended up just being such a phenomenal and wonderful ride. And I very quickly found myself helping to design 3D cleats for Neymar and Ronaldo, and did a bunch of work with Chad for Jordan and some other major athletes. And it was just such an incredible experience. And a few years into that, we were really just focused on the 3D design and 3D printing aspect, and very little of it was on the visualization. So I really started to hone in on that and see a huge market opportunity there to really scale out that capability. And after a lot of failed attempts, I finally found success in influencing some executive sponsorship, and we managed to grow an incredible team. And through that, I became a people manager, and then the director over the virtual materials studio. And that was such a wonderful time, and we had team members all across the world working on it. And right now, I've transitioned over to Adobe, and here I'm essentially a solutions consultant, really focused on Gen AI and the substance side, and really helping companies and consulting with them and advising them on how they can transform their companies with emerging technologies. So that's a little bit about me, of where I was, and where I went. I started Nike 2014, and then just recently transitioned this last year. So Adobe is still a very new world for me.
Well, thank you guys for this, and it's really awesome to always hear these sort of stories, because most people, I would say, almost like probably everyone, I'm gonna say most, end up in design by chance, or just like finding it, like, oh yeah, it exists. Well, the whole world is full of products and objects, and we didn't know about this. Like, they just suddenly appear. So yeah, great to hear your stories, and great to hear that you come from like very different directions, skateboarding and like cows and chickens. uh, so cool. So let's jump directly into the topic that has us all really interested. And so my first question is kind of like a very simple one, but very straightforward one. Why do you think 3D is important, or even like not just 3D, but like digital workflows are important?
Mhm.
Um, I will take that. I would say it's if you want to do anything related to a product that exists in our world, then it has to be made in 3D. It's not a technology, it's a dimension set. And it's inescapable that it is part of the future. It's enabler of how we interface with AI and a lot of these things if we want to experience what it's creating. So I think that 3D is just it's foundational. It's the same thing as digital. Um, it's another part of the system that needs to be laid as a foundation to go to the next level. And I think it went, computation, then digital, and now it's virtual, and now we're figuring out what that experience is and how we work with the technology.
Yeah, Chad, like that is so incredibly true. And when we think about it, like everything that we interact, I mean, we get a little complex, but generally speaking, everything that we interact with in the world is 3D, right? It's got volume, it's got surfaces, it's got textures. And so like traditional 2D drawings, they're great, they're inspirational. But there's still this momentous gap between that and how we perceive reality. And 3D really does a phenomenal job of bridging that gap. And so it helps us communicate design intent more effectively and more accurately than what, traditional design approaches do, right? And then you can continue to expand on that in 3D video. And, the closer you can get to mimicking reality and a virtual world or immersive reality, right? The closer and better you can communicate your vision, right? Because designers, we take these incredible ideas, and then our job is to translate them into powerful experiences. And so the more that we can do that and use the different mediums, right, for that, then the better that we can communicate our intent and do our job. And 3D happens to be a wonderful tool to be able to do that, and it has such marvelous outputs, right? It's not just the 3D or the visualization, but now you can send that to manufacturing, in certain experiences, or you can at least use it to translate that. So now you can translate this one asset into a variety of different workflows and requirements and needs way better than prior technology could get. And now we're getting into incredible technology with nerfs and Gaussian splats and all sorts of fun things that really are just hyper accelerating that capability.
Yeah. So it feels like in a way that we've gone there's a whole journey that we've gone through as like humanity, that we have these ideas, and to make them before, I mean, obviously we've always had kind of like the physical modeling side of things, but otherwise to be able to express those ideas, the tools that we had available were very, in a way, I mean, they're amazing, but they were limiting in some ways. Or like we were staying with 2D only because we didn't really have the technologies to allow us to get to 3D in an easy way, right? And
Hmm.
as we've kind of like progressed with technology, now we live in this moment where we're kind of like almost like going around that circle and getting closer to the real way of thinking about things and the real way of working, which is like that physical modeling side of things, but that with the magic of the digital world. So it's kind of like funny that it's not that technology is allowing us to, obviously it's allowing us to do more, but it's not that it's allowing us to do something different, but it's allowing us to do the same, like what we were always supposed to be doing, right? Which is kind of,
Mhm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that we use technology to either delegate a capability or a skill, which we do with visualization to the software, but it's also about augmenting our own capabilities, and it is coming full circle. We what we're doing traditionally, 2D drawing is akin to cave painting. It's no different. It's like you're collapsing your idea of something that you want to make into a drawing that then has to be have dimensionality breathed back into it to make sense of it, and it's just an exhaustive exercise. If you're going to make a 3D product, it makes sense to start in 3D. To your point, it's been very challenging to use the tools. It's been very technical. So having some context around the tools, I think, relative to what it is that you're designing, I think could be incredibly powerful. But I think working in an intuitive environment where it is a 3D space and you're using your hands to craft things, but it's virtual. It's not physical. I think that is something that when people see it, they understand a little bit more about the value in 3D, because I think it clicks more then that you're returning to a place of like intuitive interaction.
yeah, which is like, it feels funny that we're returning but we're advancing in technology. It's just, and so that kind of like leads me to my next question, which is like, why do you think it's taken so long now that we have these tools that are way more intuitive, right? Like, John, now you're at Adobe, you've seen kind of like how amazing some of the tools are. There Substance is just like, next level. We have Gravity Sketch, we have so many tools out there that are now really catered for the designers, for the creatives, for these kind of like spatial thinking people.
Hmm.
What Why do you think it's still taking so long for people to jump into those tools, to adopt them, to kind of like make them feel like it's part of a creative workflow? Because before it used to be something that was a little bit alien for us.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jonathan, you want to take a stab at this one?
Oh, I'd love to. There's so many reasons for this. And there's a lot of nuance to this conversation of why it's been such a difficult transition for so many companies. A lot of it, a lot of it comes down to people, right? And one of the main challenges is that 3D and 3D design historically has been a very technical topic. it's only been fairly recently that tools like Gravity Sketch and others that have come up that have really lowered that barrier to entry. And so it's been a really technical topic for business leaders to be able to understand, right? So you have to understand that a lot of these leaders in these corporations, they come from a business background. They have an MBA, they understand corporate finance, they're very talented with strategy, but they're not very well versed in these technologies, right? And so then if they have me coming to them and saying, "Hey, like there's this brand new technology, I think we should go all into it. It's called, Gaussian splats, and this is all the reasons XYZ, we got to do it." And they're like, "Yes, that makes total sense." And then you got someone like Chad who's going to be like, "No, like it's nerfs. You got to go into nerfs because of ABC reasons." And now they have these competing worldviews, and they don't have that subject matter knowledge to really understand um, what it is, what the benefits are. They're being told completely different things with completely rational logic. And so now they're in this really tough position of how do we understand and how do we get to the point of truth of here of what's best for our organization at this point in time. And honestly, a lot of these leaders, like all of us, are very strapped for time, so they don't have the time to be able to go in and step by step really understand, go to the conferences. And so they really have to rely on trust, and that's either trust within their organization or trust with consultants. And that's where a lot of organizations can tend to go wrong, is relying too heavy on the consultant side of things. But that's a really big challenge into this industry. And that gap widens because a lot of us creatives, we're designers first. We are creatives at heart, and we don't understand, and we haven't really gone to school to learn strategy and how do you talk corporate speak and how do you, create and analyze the net present value and cash flow and revenue and all these business terms. And so we've got the gap from leadership side and then a gap from the creative side, and there's not very many people that can live in that middle to bridge both worlds. And then you get that compounded by entrenched workflows, right? So then you have a lot of individuals that are very comfortable with the way that they're working and don't want to change or can't see the value in changing. And then when you do have this technology change, now you have this big skill gap. And then what do you do with that? And so you have all these designers that now have these other designers that are working in 3D, but they're still working in 2D. And now they're kind of getting stressed out, but they don't really have the support to be able to learn the 3D. So now they got to learn it on their own side, but they don't really understand where the best places to go. And there's not that change management in place to make sure that they're successful. And so then a wider wedge starts to be driven into that organization. And then you have, just the natural tendencies for humans to want to empire build or egos or, our feelings on either side. And so everything can get really, really messy. That makes these big transformational movements really challenging to do. And so there's a few tactics. Of course, you can do that. One of my favorite is the law of diffusion of innovation that we can get into in here in a minute. But Chad, I wanted to hand that over to you, man, and see if you got anything to add to that.
Yeah, sorry, I just got engaged real quick on a question on the chat. No, that was spot on too. And I think that there has been a lot of I don't want to say misconception maybe, but a lack of acknowledgement of what this really entails to implement it. I've been looking into this a lot recently too, because I have noticed when looking, returning to the industry after exploring gaming for a little bit to kind of round out my knowledge base, I was just surprised to see how much or how little progress had been made in the years that I've been away. And given all I had seen in terms of the technology that had advanced in that meantime. I think Jonathan has a very fair point that we don't have the same skill sets as our business partners, where our focus is, at least, sorry, I'll speak for myself. My focus was always to work at a company doing something I loved and contribute to it because it was a company I loved. It wasn't about trying to sell an idea or pitch things. Like I was there to identify what needed to be done and try to do it. And it was a little lost on me. I think it in some naivete for sure that that wasn't everybody's goal, was to go do awesome things. There was people who were in it for their own careers and whatnot. But even with assuming best intent, there are always bad actors on both sides. But I think that the crux of the problem is this: there are three industries that 3D originated in, right? There's entertainment. They made polygons, there's engineering. Sorry, they made NURBS, but before that, medical created voxels. So you have three different types of modeling. You have polygons, you have volumetric, and you have surface. Those are all different technologies that serve different purposes, but they're all confined within these industries, and they've been fractured and they've grown, but no one's taking the time to look up and make sense of it holistically. So when let's say a leader turns to a 3D expert, they don't know what field they're going to land in. And what they hear is going to be absolutely, I don't want to say polar different, but it's going to be completely different from what they would hear from somebody from a separate industry. And those are conflicting seeming, but in product, we actually need not only like polygons or NURBS, we need all of it because we have a full design process too. Like gaming, that's art, engineering, they receive a final product. Product is the whole thing. And you have to understand how to leverage those assets where in the process and even leverage where techniques are best used and things like that. But I've said it before, and I'll say it again, you cannot make a strategy, or you can't put together a workable strategy or a plan for a technology that you don't understand. And I think that has to be something that is acknowledged, that this is technology. It's computer science. It's not something that is like subjective, or it's something that we're trying to pitch. A lot of the time we are traditionally. I had experienced where there was a weird tension about 3D in these businesses sometimes, and it wasn't just Nike; it was all the companies I've worked at. And I know that there's people, friends of mine, that experienced the same thing, where even just discussing this stuff is taboo. And I think that says something. The fact that if you can, it's kind of like a litmus test for where your company is at with their progress. If you mention 3D and propose some ideas, if you're met with a reaction to a seemingly innocuous proposal or question really dramatically, then that's a sign that there's something off, because you would say that about anything in any other relationship or experience. So I think it's a matter of acknowledging that each side, business and the expert, have critical roles to play in this, and we need to learn how to work together, because they're great at strategy and navigating the business and communicating these ideas, but we have all the solutions for them to present. And it doesn't work in anybody's interest when the people who aren't great at presenting are going up against people who are great at presenting, but they don't have the proper information. So I think that there's something that needs to be rectified there. Um, we can get into, I've been doing some work that I think will help towards this, but we can get into that later.
Yeah, and Chad, I want to add on to something that you mentioned, there at the end, and connecting here with David's comment in the chat of being able to connect end-to-end workflows. So historically, that's been a very challenging aspect in this 3D design space, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that connects really well into the standards work that you're doing on the side, and the voxels and the polygons and all these different technologies. It is very challenging to not only go from concept through manufacturing with any sort of data set, 3D or 2D. But it's also really challenging to go from any software to any software, right? And
Yep.
so if you have someone that's working in Blender or Maya, or whatever the program might be, or even like materials are so challenging historically. Things are changing, but historically have been very challenging, right? So you can do your entire look and say Maya, you got Maya and V-Ray, and it looks beautiful, and now all of a sudden you need to translate that into Unreal for an experience. Now, historically, you've had to completely redo your entire system, and it doesn't look the
Mm-hmm.
same, and so it's very challenging to be able to um, go from system to system, or hand it off to different teams. And that has been a huge part that's really held back this industry, and why we haven't been able to move forward. And things are changing with USC and some Material X and some other aspects in that. But because of the rate of change, that's also been a stumbling block to a lot of leadership, right? And so there's this idea of like, last year you were telling me this, now it's this. I can't keep up. And like that's like I feel that way. Like the amount of change and progress is astounding right now. And so there's a lot of thought at leadership levels that's like, well, if I just wait 2 years, AI will solve this, or this
Hmm.
technology will solve this. I just need to wait and hold, and and then the challenge here with that with leaders that have that perspective, and I've been guilty of this too, is that if you do wait for that in 2 years, well, now you're starting from square one in 2 years, and then now you have to learn that, right? And so instead of if you started now and put some of that investment in, you're going to be up with the rest of the crowd that did the same thing, right? But if
Well,
you
not
wait until
just
the 2 years, like you're behind then at that point.
exactly, but I was going to say not only that, but you get to that point, and the AI looks at you and it says, "Okay, what do you want to do?" And
Hmm.
you can't say back to it, "Would you tell me? I've waited for you to figure this all out." Like you have to understand how to work these things. They're just tools at the end of the day. And 3D is invaluable, 2D is invaluable, computation
Hmm.
is invaluable just because they're lower down the totem pole, but they're requirements to continue building. That I
Absolutely,
think is
yeah.
the key part. And
And
you
the like the challenge here with being a designer is knowing when to use what
mhm,
tool at what stage in the process, right? Like you don't want to start concepting using engineering tools or software, but concepting with Gravity Sketch or with any sort of sculpting tool, ZBrush, or even even getting into Cinema 4D to communicate, and then going down towards more accurate. That's a really effective workflow, right? And that's a big challenge I've seen different companies run into is using the wrong tool in the wrong spot and
mhm,
then being, hand tied by that and not being able to move forward as fast as they want to. And 3D, really traditionally is a big investment, right? Like it does take a lot of time and knowledge to learn and execute. Drawing um, to, like doing a sketch is
mhm.
faster than creating a 3D model, right? And so using the tool at the right time for the right reasons is very important.
Yeah, I would also say that I think that as these tools get more intuitive, code is collapsing. It's going to be more accessible. You could do 3D modeling on your phone soon. Just that the collapsing of computation to much more simple states where you can create, like even some of the things I've been working on, where we've identified ways to create incredibly complex shapes and have a lot of variation in them with super simple starting algorithms. And I think that it's also looking at like Daniela was saying, when you look at returning a little bit to how we interact with this world, we interact with materials. We don't interact with things on on a certain level. So
Mhm.
to think that we're constantly going to use polygons and put pictures on them to represent life is insane. So clearly, I think things will be moving to volumetric modeling and just becoming more intuitive. We'll have overlays in front of us, and I think that the biggest challenge in adoption right now is just the thinking that that will never happen, or that some technology that is already pretty much figured out is perceived as sci-fi or ridiculous. Like you have to realize that things are going so fast right now and they're so far out there that it's akin to the internet coming. It's not like it's too late to do anything about it, but it is coming, and you're going to have to prepare for these things. And that's again, that's I think why we're here today, is to really try to just help be a voice to help try to guide how to do that, because it is absolutely critical if you want to be able to participate in in businesses in the future, because it's going to be so fast from idea to consumer or
Mhm.
community, as I would prefer to call it. Like
Yeah.
you're providing something to your community because you sense a need and you give it to them.
Mhm.
Idea to output. You don't need a whole sales team or a whole data analytics team. If you can sense the needs of your community because you have authentic engagement with it, you know what they need. And then
Mhm.
I think that's going to put the creatives in the driver's seat in a lot of situations.
Yeah, and I mean it feels like there's so much. I mean, start technology has always had this flow of it comes out and it's a little bit complex, and then people need to understand it. Not everybody can stop and like understand it. So there's a lot of people that put into the like job of getting specialized on that specific technology, and then teams start to build, and then more teams start to grow, and then like suddenly there's this whole like specialization about this specific technology, and it becomes really complex. But then little by little that technology starts getting easier and easier, and so like more people can start doing it, and then that kind of like specialization becomes less specialized, and then it becomes kind of like a mainstream sort of thing. And it feels like for 3D it's gone really crazy in the specialization side of things, because it is very technical. And
Hmm.
we've been doing this for a really long time. Before I started Gravity Sketch, I was living that problem. I was the designer that was feeling so anxious about all of the different file types, and if I created something in Nerves, then I wanted to edit it in something else, and I was like, I just want to make it. Like
Yeah,
like I don't know. And so I felt the pain. That's why we started Gravity Sketch. But like it's been 10 years since then, and we're still living in that moment, obviously in a like slightly easier way, but we're still living in the specialization side of things.
mm,
We have massive teams that are only in charge of doing CAD, and we still have designers that are only like that shouldn't even touch a mouse, like they should just be kind of like touching a pen sort of thing. And so but now we have the tools available for everyone to kind of like get together, because the people that are only doing CAD sometimes also want to touch a pen. And
oh yeah,
and the people that are only using a pen want to be able to have the power of doing the 3D models. And
Mhm.
so it feels like there's this kind of like tangle right now, and there's this old, it's a bit of a mess kind of thing. There is this solution, but like it feels like everybody's trying to figure out how to get out of it, and then you end up having deadlines, having people that can't really stop to understand all these different technology jargons. And Chad, you've been working on this for like like trying to figure out how to translate it for people so it feels easier to understand, because it is easy if we
it
explain
is.
it in easy terms, right?
Mhm.
And so how do you, like, from knowing all of this, knowing that we're in this tangle, and you guys being in the in the forefront of just having to convince all these people, designers also, right? Because it's not only decision makers, it's also designers, getting out of their comfort zone. What are some of the techniques or things that you've tried that have worked for people to be able to jump on board the 3D world, 3D movement?
The thing that has worked best for me is presenting facts. And because again, the business partners I've worked with there, one of their main purposes is risk reduction. And if we're all proposing different suggestions, it's very hard for them to evaluate what the risk is taking something on. So again, I've been working on a set of standards that identifies what the different model types are, what these different techniques are, going from manual to parametric, procedural, computational, generative, and how they work together in a system. And it's agnostic of industry. So the solutions can be abstracted to a point where you can apply them to different industries, and you can start to look at, okay, if I wanted to execute this, or I wanted to do this task, what would be the best tool and technique and medium, if you will, for that? So I think that again, we've not done the best job on our end as 3D experts in terms of being able to provide something to ourselves or to our business partners that says we know what we're talking about. And we get very emotional and we get very frustrated when we're trying to say that, like, when you hear that something can't be done and you're saying how to do it, it's drives you. There's nothing more maddening. But it's like, I understand why. Like, we haven't given them the tools. So I think it's imperative for the humility on both sides that we need each other to work with, and there has to be like honesty, transparency, open source as much as possible. No more like gatekeeping or thinking that your knowledge is so special that you're better than somebody else. It has to be a more of a cooperative ecosystem moving forward, I think, for these things to work, because you have to be able to be dynamic and agile. and
Mhm.
be able to not just adopt new technologies, but there are emergent technologies that happen when certain things hit intersections of innovation within different things. You'll have an emergent property, and if you haven't done the groundwork, you're not going to be prepared for those unseen things as well. So I think it's just a matter of acknowledging that this is not like it's not like something you're just going to hire an agency to do. And it's insane to think that anybody who or somebody who went to school for one thing knows everything about computers since they were introduced to business, and that they should be over all of that. So
Yeah.
I think we need to take the digital and virtual side of things far more seriously.
Yeah, and I'll add my point of view here quickly, and then we can transition to some audience questions. So I think a mistake. So some real practical guidance here is one of the number one mistakes I see is people start with the technology rather than the people, and so they leave people out of the conversation, and they really look too hard at the technology, right? And so it becomes this really top down directive instead of this grassroots effort. One of my favorite strategies to employ is called the law of diffusion of innovation, and so I highly recommend anyone to look into this. It's and just an incredible concept to have. And so it basically follows this bell curve, right? And so you have the innovators on the one side, and then you have the early adopters, and then the early majority, the late majority, and then the laggards, right? And so a very um, common bell curve. And so if you can influence the innovators and the early adopters, influencing the rest of the organization becomes phenomenally more easy to do because you have those early movers that are willing to take that risk. And so if you can be able to utilize soft skills and influencing and really work with everybody with a collaborative spirit, and if you can get them bought into your why and get them bought into your mission and the facts that Chad was talking about, then the rest of that community who likes to design but might not like to be the first movers will want to join you and be along with it. And then there's the laggards who, there's nothing that you can do to influence them and to do that. But if you can get that first 10%, then it becomes so much easier. And that comes with having a champion that supports you at the ground level, and then having an executive influencer at the top that has, some of the financial means, and being able to bridge those two worlds is a highly effective strategy to use.
I also think that that's a lot to expect of a 3D person who's working in an organization by themselves. That
Totally.
I know a lot of people who have to sit there and defend their job that they were hired to do. And like that is, I think, what I'm getting at here is that is standing in the way of yourself. And if you're doing that, it's hard to ask questions about why we're not being successful. So I just think again it's about cooperation. It's about humility. I think selling in up like that is a great idea. It's like how product seeding is done. You give it to the super early adopters, the trendsetters, um, but that's still, I think, working around the problem. And I think it's more about solving the problem and opening up communication dialogue. Um, because again, this shouldn't be the burden on the expert. And I hear a lot of people who are overwhelmed and stressed out because they're tasked with like explaining to their leadership team. They're not even in a leadership position a lot of the time, but they're tasked with telling the leadership team how they should implement all this stuff and how to do it. But it's not on them. That is not on them. And I think it's an unfair expectation. But again, I think that we can do better as well. So my hope is to be able to release these standards within the next week, trying to find the best way to do it. But my hope is to make it available to anyone who's interested in using them.
Love it.
That's awesome. And so I think we've talked a lot about convincing the decision makers, all these like technicalities that are getting in the way and so on. But there's also the side of things where you've seen, and you guys have seen success, and you've seen kind of like people getting convinced, right? And there's kind of like this, and obviously you need to create a perfect environment where you're allowed to test things out and prove people with facts, right? And so, there's different facts that you can prove, whether, I mean, there's certain ones that are a little bit more difficult to quantify, like people being more creative. um, or, but then there's some other ones that are, maybe we're doing less models, like physical models and prototypes, right? We're having to fly less to China or Asia or whatever we're doing the samples, because now we can, communicate with each other in 3D and in these sort of things. So what would you say are some of those things that have been quite magical in a way, that had made people open their eyes? There's a lot about collaboration, I sense, but what are those stories that you can tell us that just kind of like help to get people to understand how to open people's eyes?
Yeah, yeah, I've got a really great one. So
Go ahead.
being in the concept and design world is extremely challenging to quantify impacts, right? Because the greatest mission that we have is to create better design. Well, how do you quantify what a better design is? And you can't exactly do an A/B test, right? And so, especially in the footwear industry, when you have a 2 year lead time from concept to shelf, so it's very challenging to quantify those things. Um, but there was an example that we had within the Nike walls where I had a designer on the team. Shout out to Mike Pantano, who's a legendary substance designer. And he was brought into this situation where there was a designer who was creating this really complex um, design and was not able to communicate it effectively to the factory, and it had been a year of design time, and so the project was about to be scrapped. And I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars have been invested at this point. And so we got brought in into the situation, and Mike just did an incredible job of understanding the pain points, understanding what was trying to be communicated and what the gap was. And then he used Substance Designer and Substance Painter to create this incredibly complex graph, expose very simple parameters, and then put it into Painter. And then he was able to hand this Painter file off to this designer. And this designer had never used 3D, never used Painter, never used any of this technology, and was able within less than a week to do some training and be able to show this designer how they can paint on this 3D form, how they can underpin these really complex mechanisms in a very intuitive way. And within less than a month, they were able to get the design, send it out to the factory, and the very first prototype completely nailed the design, something that they had struggled for an entire year to do. They were able to communicate in less than a month. And type of facts and being able to show and demonstrate is so incredibly valuable when you can tell that story to leadership and you can explain how it used to be, how this is, and be able to, soft skills are going to be so important for the designer moving up as technology evolves. And we're going to have to become more and more skilled in being able to communicate the impact and how and what it takes to do these sorts of things. And so that had phenomenal success within Nike, and just led to incredible things afterwards.
Yeah, I did just add to that that my experience has been that most people, when they refer to 3D, they're referring to their experience or their assumption of what 3D is. So showing them what 3D is capable of these days, it makes a huge difference. So even like at Nike, my team created a shape blending tool where the 3D design team all designed their own custom shapes. We set up a very simple system with sliders, and designers could go through and explore shapes. And it was, again, it was like you were not using it for, it was an inspiration kind of discovery tool, but it showed a use case for 3D that people hadn't seen before, and that I think uh, got a lot of people, got a lot of wheels turning about where 3D could add value that they weren't seeing right then, which I think was a really good win, um, because there's value, I think, for 3D to add, in every step of the process, especially for product.
Mhm.
Cool. All right. Well, it would be great to jump a little bit into the questions from the audience. There's some like funny ones here, or not funny ones, but Interesting ones. Where should I put my energy? Gravity Sketch, Rhino, Grasshopper, AI, rendering, animation, or Blender?
I
That's a great one. Chad, you want to take it?
Yeah, I would say learn the basics of what, um, if you want to learn Rhino, learn the basics of what NURBS is. But I think figure out what it is that you want to do should inform what you want to learn. But anything about computational, how node networks work and information theory, learn that stuff because that is how, we're going away from linear workflows and we're going into systems. So learn how to think in systems, and I think Houdini would be a great one, or Unreal Engine. Or I mean,
Mhm.
it depends though. Like depends what you want.
Yeah,
If
yeah,
it,
I'll add on to that with my perspective. So, yeah, it really depends on what direction are you in film, are you in product design, are you in footwear, are you in apparel, right? Like if you're in apparel, like there's Clo and there's browser and there's other tools in there that you want to learn. But learning the concepts and learning the fundamentals of how the technologies work, where the technologies are going, is critically important before you choose a path and a direction that you want to take, and understanding the requirements within that division. But to Chad's point of understanding tools where you can parametrically or computationally design is incredibly powerful because there's more and more demands on the designer to move faster. And being able to design in a non-destructive way is vitally important to your success as a designer. So long gone are the days where you can just polygon model and then hand it over, and then tweak vertices. You have to be able to move faster these days, and so
mhm.
being able to have an understanding of how to do that. And there's a lot of great tools. Blender's a really fantastic tool to start if you just need a place because
Yeah.
it's free. It's got a lot of capabilities, and then of course Unreal, and that's so heavily used in the industry, and both are free to be able to get into. So I would really invest in those tools if you're on the footwear polygon sort of side before investing money into things. And then always keep an eye on AI, and because there's this incredible synergy that's building between the two, and where the two worlds are coming together. And the more effective you can do and create that triangle of fast and amazing, then the more sought after you'll become.
I'm going to change my answer. Learn AI because it can teach you all those other tools that you asked about. It's like having a professor in your pocket now.
Good. All right. So, is there a cross industry? I mean, I think Chad is like spearheading this, but is there a cross industry committee around 3D standardization or just discussion group around how to help industry move forward? It sounds like you are doing great work and thought in the space, and would love to know more about the progress about this.
Whoever, if you're still here and you want to reach out to me via LinkedIn, I would be happy to. This is a new space for me, trying to figure out how to implement standards or set up a committee. But it's something that I feel is very important. And it felt a little bit out of my wheelhouse for a while, but I'm realizing it's just a matter of claiming that you're a committee and you're a committee.
um, Oh, Chad, I'll add into this. Totally not sponsored, but a good friend of mine, Michael Tenzilo, has a 3D artist school community. He is such a not only incredibly talented designer, but a phenomenal human being. And that community
Execute and add
really
value.
is really about like cross community and cross industry knowledge sharing. And so I highly advise anyone to check out that community. I'm not I don't lead it. I'm not a sponsor of it, but I love that community, and Chad's part of it, and he shared a lot of that work in it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there's definitely not a. It's about this whole mess that we've been talking about, and you know, then John, you brought in AI as well. Like it just keeps going and going and going. But there's definitely a need, but also a way to find a place where we can all be speaking the same language in a
Hmm.
way that we can all understand it. Business people, creative people, engineers, like if you start understanding it, it's not that as complex as
Yes.
we thought.
Hmm.
And creating a terms of art for 3D cross industry is part of what will be included in my work. So it is a proposal also for a unified terminology that can help to speak across industries.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much, John and Chad, for joining us today. I think this conversation could just continue forever and ever, and probably it should. So there's definitely something else that we need to be doing together. But it was so inspiring to be on the same stage with you guys. Thank you so much. And yeah, see you next time.
Thank you
Amazing.
so
Thank
much
you.
for creating the platform for these discussions. Because I too have always felt like they should be being had but weren't. So thank you very
Mm-hmm.
much.
100%. Thank you.
Thanks. So next up, head to our main stage event about adopting new tools, the evolution of Gravity Sketch in Polaris workflows.